They scoff at the unknown, but it waits for them silent, patient, and all too real.
The bridge that should not be crossed. The sun was slipping below the horizon, staining the sky with blood-red hues, when I first noticed the figure standing on the edge of the old ironwood bridge. It was a woman, or at least, she had the shape of one, thin, motionless, her face hidden beneath a veil of shadows. I was driving back from work, my truck rumbling over the cracked asphalt of Elm Street, when my eyes caught her outline. She didn't move as my headlights swept over her. It wasn't until I reached the other side of the bridge that I realized something was wrong. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat. A text message, "Don't look back." My stomach tightened as if I had swallowed a fistful of broken glass. The sender was an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The woman was gone. I live in Mill Haven, a sleepy little town in Vermont that feels like it's been forgotten by time. With its white picket fences, mom-and-pop diners, and a single, tiny movie theater, it's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody. And everybody knows about the Ironwood Bridge. The stories have been passed down for generations. Never cross it after sunset, the old-timers would say, their voices dropping to whispers as if the bridge itself might overhear. They had 1,000 reasons why: ghosts, curses, some kind of ancient spirit that couldn't stand the light of day. I never paid much attention. I work as a mechanic at Tom's Auto Shop on the edge of town. It's a simple life, clocking in at 9 a.m., getting my hands dirty fixing up cars that have seen better days, and heading home to my one-bedroom apartment above the local diner. After my divorce, I didn't want much else, just peace and quiet. Most evenings, I'd spend hours tinkering with an old Mustang in my garage, a relic from my younger days that I swore I'd get running someday. I liked the routine. It kept my mind occupied, kept the loneliness at bay. But that night, after seeing the figure on the bridge, nothing felt normal. As the sun set, casting long shadows across Mill Haven, I found myself sitting in my kitchen, staring at my phone. The text message was still there, glowing on the screen like an accusation: "Don't look back." I told myself it was a prank. Maybe one of the guys at work had heard I'd driven over the Ironwood Bridge after sunset and decided to mess with me. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second a hammer driving nails into my nerves. When I finally crawled into bed, sleep didn't come easy. I kept seeing her face, or rather, the lack of it. A hollow, shadowed void where features should have been. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the unease clung to me like a wet shroud. The next morning, I asked around town about the bridge. Most people just gave me the usual folklore: don't cross it at night, don't stop in the middle, and for God's sake, don't turn around if you hear someone call your name. But old Mrs. Harper, who ran the antiques shop on Main Street, had a different story. "They say the bridge was built over a burial ground," she whispered, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "Not Native American, something older. The workers who built it, they saw things. Heard whispers coming from the water. One of them went mad and threw himself off the edge. His body was never found." I thanked her and left the shop, feeling more unsettled than ever. That evening, as I was locking up the garage, my coworker Jake threw me a questioning look. "You okay, Sam? You've been jumpy all day." I shrugged it off, mumbling something about a bad night's sleep. Jake laughed. "Don't tell me you're spooked about the Ironwood Bridge. You know that's all just BS, right?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just old stories." But as I climbed into my truck, the unease gnawed at me again. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The drive home was uneventful until I reached Elm Street. As I approached the bridge, my hands tightened on the wheel. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, but the bridge seemed to stretch into an infinite void, darker than the night itself. I kept my eyes forward, my heart thudding against my ribs. The urge to look in the rearview mirror was almost unbearable, but I resisted. And then it happened. A knock, soft, deliberate, on the back window of my truck. I slammed on the brakes, my truck skidding to a stop in the middle of the bridge. The knock came again, louder this time. My breath caught in my throat as I stared straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "Keep driving," I whispered to myself. "Just keep driving." But curiosity is a cruel thing. Against every instinct screaming at me to ignore it, I glanced in the mirror. She was there. The woman from the night before, her hollow face inches from the glass, veiled in shadows. But this time, she moved. Her hand pressed against the window, leaving a smear of something dark and wet. I slammed my foot on the gas, the engine roaring as I sped off the bridge. When I finally reached the safety of my apartment, I locked every door and window, trembling like a leaf. I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow seemed to shift, every creak of the floorboards felt like a footstep. And the next morning, when I went to check my truck, there was a handprint on the back window. It wasn't mine. The days after that night on the bridge blurred together into a haze of unease. I stuck to my routines, work, dinner, sleep, but everything felt off. The handprint on my truck had vanished by the next morning, leaving behind no evidence of what I'd seen. Yet the memory lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind like a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. By the time Friday rolled around, I was desperate for a distraction. Jake convinced me to join him and a few others for drinks at O'Malley's, swearing it'd get me out of my head. For a while, it worked. The warm hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the soft strum of a local band in the corner, it felt like life was normal again. Jake cracked jokes, the bartender poured generously, and for the first time in days, I let myself laugh. But then my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was a notification, some random spam text or an update I could ignore. But when I pulled the phone from my pocket, my stomach twisted. "You left something behind." The message came from the same unknown number. I stared at the screen, my grip tightening around the phone. My mind raced. Was someone watching me? Was this all a prank? "Everything all right, man?" Jake asked, his face blurring as panic clouded my vision. "Yeah," I lied, shoving the phone back into my pocket. "Just work stuff." I made it through another hour of conversation before the air in the bar started to feel suffocating. Excusing myself, I stepped outside, letting the cool night air hit my face. I leaned against the brick wall, staring out at the darkened street, trying to steady my breathing. The wind rustled the trees lining the sidewalk, their bare branches scraping together like dry bones. For a moment, I thought I saw movement near the edge of the lot, a figure slipping behind one of the parked cars. My pulse quickened, but when I stepped forward for a better look, there was nothing there. It was just my imagination. It had to be. But as I walked back inside, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, my thoughts churning with the memory of the bridge, the text messages, and the shadowed figure I thought I saw. Sometime after midnight, I awoke to the sound of faint knocking. At first, I thought it was my front door, but as I sat up in bed, the noise became clearer. It was coming from the window. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The knocking was soft, rhythmic, as though someone, or something, was tapping with deliberate intent. I didn't move. The air in the room grew colder, a chill seeping through the walls that raised goosebumps on my skin. My breath fogged in front of me as the knocking stopped, replaced by a faint, muffled whisper. Sam. My name. The voice was faint but unmistakable, like it had been carried on the wind from miles away. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the bed and crept toward the window, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stop. Slowly, I pulled back the curtain. The street below was empty. No shadows, no figures, nothing. Just the faint glow of a flickering streetlight. But as I turned away, I saw it, faint, smeared on the outside of the glass. Another handprint. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. At work, every noise, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the clang of tools, seemed sharper, more menacing. During lunch, I told Jake about the handprints, leaving out the texts and the whispers. "Man, you're freaking yourself out," he said, laughing. "Probably just some kid messing with you. Or maybe it's the bridge ghost." His grin faltered when he saw my expression. "Wait, you're not serious, are you?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Sam," he said, lowering his voice. "You didn't cross the bridge after dark, did you?" "It was just once," I said quickly. "I didn't think." Jake held up a hand to stop me. "You need to go see Mrs. Harper. She knows all the weird stories about this town. If anyone can help, it's her." I wasn't sure what I was expecting when I walked into the antiques shop later that day. Mrs. Harper, with her wild gray hair and piercing eyes, looked up from the counter as I entered. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said, her voice gravelly but kind. I froze. "You knew I'd be here?" "You're not the first to see her," she said simply. "But you might be the first to survive." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Survive?" She motioned for me to sit. "The bridge isn't just a place, Sam. It's a threshold. Something ancient and hungry waits there, and crossing after dark, it's like ringing the dinner bell." "What does it want?" I whispered, my throat dry. "To pull you back," she said. "Back across the bridge. Back to where it waits." "Why me?" Mrs. Harper's gaze darkened. "Because you looked back. You acknowledged it. And now it knows you." As I left the shop, her words rattled around in my skull like loose screws. The sun was setting, casting the town in shades of gold and crimson. I drove home in silence, the radio turned off, my grip on the wheel tight enough to make my knuckles ache. When I reached my apartment, I double-checked every lock, drew the curtains, and sat in the middle of the living room with every light on. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, one thought gnawed at me. If it wanted to pull me back, what would happen when it succeeded? The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have, each second stretching into an eternity. Mrs. Harper's words circled endlessly in my mind, "Because you looked back. And now it knows you." For hours, I sat in the middle of my living room, gripping the bat like a lifeline. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, but inside, everything was still. Too still. At exactly 3:33 a.m., my phone buzzed. I jumped, nearly dropping the bat as I fumbled for the phone. The screen glowed in the dim light, unknown number. My breath hitched. I opened the message. "Come back to the bridge." Before I could react, another text followed. "It's the only way to end this." Every instinct screamed at me to throw the phone, to block the number, to pretend it wasn't real. But deep down, I knew that ignoring it wouldn't stop whatever this was. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, pooling in the corners like ink. A faint noise broke the silence, a low, distant hum, growing steadily louder. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the hallway. Heart pounding, I stood and edged toward the door. The hum morphed into a whisper, a chorus of voices, rising and falling in an eerie rhythm. I reached the door and swung it open. The hallway was empty. But there, in the middle of the floor, was a piece of paper. I bent down to pick it up, my hands trembling. Written in shaky, jagged letters were the words, "She will not stop." By dawn, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, and every shadow seemed alive. I needed answers. Against my better judgment, I went back to Mrs. Harper. The shop was dark when I arrived, the closed sign hanging in the window. I banged on the door, desperation overriding my manners. Finally, the lock clicked, and Mrs. Harper appeared, her face etched with concern. "I told you not to come back here," she said, but I pushed my way inside. "She sent me a message," I blurted. "She said I have to go back to the bridge." "What does it mean? How do I stop this?" Mrs. Harper's expression shifted, a flicker of something, fear, maybe, crossing her face. "If she's calling you back, it means she's already attached herself to you. You've crossed the line, Sam. The only way to break the connection is to finish what you started." "What do you mean?" I demanded. "You crossed the bridge," she said slowly, as if speaking to a child. "Now you have to go back and cross it again, but this time, you have to do it without looking back. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, you keep going. And if I don't?" Her silence was answer enough. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself standing at the edge of the ironwood bridge. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and rust, and the wind carried an unnatural chill that cut through my jacket. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the bridge. The boards groaned under my weight, the sound echoing into the void. The first few steps were uneventful. The creek below murmured softly, and the wind whispered through the trees. But as I reached the middle of the bridge, the temperature dropped sharply, my breath fogging in the air. Then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, indistinct murmurs carried on the wind. But as I walked, they grew louder, more insistent. Voices called my name, pleading, crying, screaming. "Sam, don't leave me. Help us. Turn around." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as I forced myself to keep moving. The boards beneath my feet began to shift, the wood creaking and groaning as if something massive was pressing against it from below. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a cacophony of voices. And then I heard her. "Sam." Her voice was different, closer, more real. It was the same voice I'd heard outside my window, in my apartment, in my nightmares. "Sam, please. Don't leave me." I squeezed my eyes shut, tears streaming down my face as I took another step. The air around me grew heavier, colder, until it felt like I was wading through water. My feet felt sluggish, each step harder than the last. Then came the smell, a sharp, metallic tang that turned my stomach. I knew what it was, blood. "Sam," her voice was right behind me now, soft and coaxing. "Just look at me." I couldn't help it. My body moved before my mind could stop it. I turned. She stood there, inches from me, her face still obscured by shadows. But her eyes, they were hollow, endless voids that seemed to pull me in, swallowing the light around us. Her hand reached for me, cold and wet, leaving streaks of darkness on my arm. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered, her voice shifting into something deeper, more inhuman. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, breaking her grip. I turned and ran, the bridge stretching endlessly before me, the whispers now a deafening roar. My legs burned, my chest heaved, but I didn't stop. Finally, the end of the bridge came into view, the safety of solid ground just feet away. With one last burst of energy, I lunged forward, collapsing onto the dirt. When I looked back, the bridge was empty. But the whisper followed me home. And this time, I knew she wasn't going to let me go. The days after my desperate escape from the bridge were a blur. I thought I had done it, I thought I had broken free. For the first time in weeks, the nights were silent. No whispers, no handprints, no eerie texts from unknown numbers. It was almost enough to make me believe it was over. But the truth is, you can't run from something that's already inside you. It started small. A fleeting shadow in the corner of my eye. A faint echo of whispers in the hum of the refrigerator late at night. Little things I could dismiss, explain away. Then I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, like damp earth, metallic and sour. It followed me everywhere, at work, at the diner, even in my truck. I scrubbed the floors, cleaned the upholstery, washed my clothes until my hands were raw, but the stench clung to me like a second skin. And then came the dreams. Each night, I was back on the bridge. The air was cold, the boards groaned under my feet, and the whispers called my name. But in the dreams, I didn't make it across. I always turned back. I always saw her. Her eyes, those endless voids, seemed to see through me, into me. Each time I woke drenched in sweat, her voice lingered in my ears, soft and mocking. "You can't escape me." The final blow came one morning when I stumbled into the bathroom, bleary-eyed and desperate for coffee. As I splashed cold water on my face, I glanced up at the mirror. At first, I thought it was just condensation from the shower I hadn't taken. But as I leaned closer, my stomach dropped. The handprints were back. This time, they weren't just on the glass. They were everywhere, on the walls, the ceiling, even the floor. Dark, smeared prints, as if someone, or something, had been crawling through my apartment in the night. I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the rug, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed Jake's number. "Pick up," I muttered, my voice cracking. "Come on, man, pick up." When the line finally connected, it wasn't Jake's voice I heard. "Sam," she whispered, her voice crackling like static. The phone slipped from my fingers, shattering against the tile floor. By the time the sun set, I had convinced myself of one thing: I had to go back. The bridge wasn't just the source of all this, it was the key. The nightmares, the handprints, the whispers, they all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. Whatever I had seen, whatever I had crossed into that night, I hadn't come back alone. The bridge wasn't just haunted. It was a tether. A connection between worlds. And I had left the door open. I returned to the bridge under the cover of darkness, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a gut-deep fear that I was walking into my own doom. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels alive, as though the world itself is holding its breath. As I stepped onto the bridge, the familiar chill crept up my spine. The air felt heavier with each step, and the whispers began almost immediately. "Sam." I ignored them, pushing forward, determined not to look back. Halfway across, the air seemed to shift. The darkness grew thicker, almost tangible, wrapping around me like a suffocating fog. The flashlight flickered, then died, plunging me into absolute blackness. "Sam, you've come back," her voice cooed, echoing all around me. I gritted my teeth, taking another step. "You think you can end this?" she hissed, her voice growing sharper, angrier. "You think you can leave me behind?" The boards beneath my feet began to creak and groan, as if something massive was stirring beneath the bridge. I stumbled forward, the sound of my own heartbeat deafening in my ears. Then, the truth revealed itself. The whispers, the shadows, the figure on the bridge, they weren't haunting me. They were part of me. I felt it first in my chest, a heavy, clawing sensation, like something trying to escape. My vision blurred, and I dropped to my knees, gasping for air. "Do you see it now?" her voice purred, so close I could feel her breath against my ear. I looked down at my hands, and for the first time, I saw the truth. The handprints. They weren't hers. They were mine. Every smear, every dark mark, they had come from me. My fingers were stained black, dripping with the same inky substance that had clung to the window, the truck, the mirror. I wasn't being haunted. I was the haunting. The revelation hit me like a freight train, shattering every fragile hope I had clung to. The bridge wasn't just a doorway, it was a mirror, reflecting the darkness I had carried with me all along. And she wasn't some vengeful spirit or cursed apparition. She was me. The figure I had seen on the bridge, the shadow that had followed me home, it was my reflection, fractured and twisted by whatever the bridge had unleashed. "I've always been with you," she whispered, her voice echoing in my mind. "You just didn't want to see." The darkness surged around me, pulling me to my feet, guiding me to the edge of the bridge. Below, the water churned, black and endless, a void that called to me with an irresistible pull. And in that moment, I understood. There was no escaping the bridge. There was no undoing what had been done. The only way forward was to surrender. As I stepped off the edge, her voice followed me, soft and triumphant. "Welcome home."